So it's Saturday morning. I'm having a cup of coffee and doing some retouching and trying to get away from the controversy that has been the Nikon release. Everybody's got 17 videos about it and whatever, and I have too, so I can't really make fun of those people too much. But what I wanted to talk about in this video is actually a question I had, I guess based on a statement I made where I said, well, I don't need that many megapixels. So I should probably write down who asked these questions, but somebody said, can you explain what you mean when you say you don't need that many megapixels? Well, I think when you're figuring out what gear to buy, you've got to figure out partially your business model. This would be important. And then also the type of work that you're going to do. So in my case, my business model is I shoot, beyond the fact that I do these videos and stuff now, and other things, but I shoot advertising and catalog type work, or shot a lot more of it in the past, shoot less of it now, but that's what I did. And I also shot a lot of actors' headshots and model portfolios, like for the agencies, and occasionally, more so now actually, musicians, right? So what I do is I think about, okay, what gear do I need to accomplish those tasks? Like, what's going to be my best gear for that's the most versatile, right? And when I look at it and I say, well, you know what, I shoot, 10 to 15 days of catalog / advertising work a year, right? Which still makes up like more than half the money I make, but because you get paid more for the bigger jobs. So that's actually shooting time. That's actually a small amount of what I do. The majority of what I do is, as I was doing and do now, is more of the smaller, the headshots, the model portfolios. Those pay a lot less, but I do them in greater quantity. So then I think to myself, well, each advertising job is a little bit different, and every time I approach it, actually, I just did try to put a link here. I'll put a link to I don't know where they pop up, but I'm going to put a link. I'm getting better at this. We just did a full Adorama video about advertising, and I talk a little bit about setting up and stuff, but each job's a little different, right? So I found myself sometimes renting really, really high megapixel cameras, and sometimes not, depending on the job. So, but for the majority of the actual shooting days of the year that I do, this stuff is not going to be printed more than a half page in a magazine, maybe a page. Most of it's used online these days. So I'm delivering, files that are usually like 2,500 or 3,000 pixels on the long end, to models that are going to put them on Instagram or on their website, or actors. Even if an actor is going to print an 8x10, 3,000 pixels on the 10-inch side is an 8x10, right? So 3,000. So let me just quickly go into that. If you're going to print something, typically, and you don't even need this much resolution, but typically people aim for 300 lines per inch or dots per inch in the case of when talking about pixels. So if you're making a 10-inch print and you want it to be, high quality, you're going to want to have 10 times 300 pixels for that length. So that's 3,000 pixels. So if you think about it that way, even if it's 10 by 10, that's 300 times 300, which ends up being, I think, 9 megapixels roughly. So that's all you need, right? I think it's 9. Somebody will correct me on the math there, because you basically multiply the two sides. So that's all you really need to make that print. So if your work is that, right, you don't need 50 megapixels unless, so there's a couple reasons why you want it. You're going to crop massively, which is one reason to have it if you don't know what you're walking into, because you can shoot wider and then crop in if need be, or if you're going to do massive amounts of retouching. So, and I'll talk about both of those in a minute. So if you think about it like that, I typically shoot my actor headshots with my old Leica M8. I love that camera. I've had it forever. It only has one card slot. It is slow as molasses. It is, by all intents and purposes of modern camera, a terrible camera if you just read the specs, but it creates images. It has a CCD sensor. It creates images that just have this amazing quality to them, and I love it. So that camera is, I think, 10 megapixels, and I shoot almost all my actors' headshots with that. So there you go. I'm shooting actors headshots, 8x10, 10 megapixel camera, more than enough. And that means that I'm not having to size anything up. Obviously, Photoshop is so good now that you can actually make stuff bigger than it is, to a certain extent. Man, there used to be like third-party programs that you would put the pictures in to make them bigger. Now Photoshop is so good. Anyways, if you're going to, mostly deliver, it's an actor's headshot. I'm not really doing a lot of retouching to it, and I love the quality of that camera, so that's what I use, right? The other camera I work with a lot is, as you guys probably see, is the 1DX Canon, which is I think 16 or 14 megapixels. I'm not really sure, actually. That is way bigger than what I need to deliver for these models, portfolios online and stuff like that. So that camera is just a beast. The reason why I use that for that purpose is it is fast, right? It's a fast camera. I never have to wait for it, like I'm waiting for. It has autofocus if you want it. It's got super fast. And when I say fast, I don't mean that I'm holding down the motor drive and shooting whatever 10 frames a second or whatever the hell it does. I mean that I can push the button as fast as I want and I never have to wait for the camera, and the pictures are right there and blah, blah, blah. It also shoots video, which is super useful to me. I use it a lot for video. So, those are my kind of camera choices. I also have a third camera that I use a bunch, which is a Sony A6500. Got little flies coming over. That one I shoot only video with. I don't even know how many megapixels it is. I don't really care. I'm going to say it's 12. I think that's probably wrong. That camera I shoot video with because it has great stabilization, and I bought a lens that's good for video. It's got the power zoom, and that's my video camera. I've used it for stills. I'm not super happy with the color palette out of Sony. I get that you could do a lot of post work to make it look good, but it's not my favorite camera to shoot stills with. I would do it if I had to, but definitely not what I use that for. So I don't need a lot of megapixels there because I'm only using it for video. Now, let's take a different approach. Advertising and bigger work, right? Catalog work. You're going to find yourself in situations where stuff needs to be retouched. And this is where I think you really end up needing the megapixels, because megapixels allow you to punch in really close on something, right? So if I'm retouching something and it's 50 megapixels, I can get super close to the eyeball and get super fine detail and take little pieces out that would be more difficult to take out. It would require much more skill in Photoshop to remove these things. If your image wasn't high resolution, you'd be looking at this very pixely image and you're trying to figure out what you need to remove and what you don't. So retouching is one of the main reasons why I would have a higher megapixel camera. And if I'm shooting like something that's like beauty and I know it's going to be retouched, I'm going to reach for something that's more high megapixel. If it's like if I want to shoot with a DSLR for whatever reason, I'd go for whatever the maximum blah, blah, blah. Yes, I don't know how. I guess the 5D Mark IV probably has the most resolution. I do not know. But I almost would rent or use a medium format camera if I had one. I had the X1D. I had to give it back to Hasselblad. But I am going to buy it, and now I'm contradicting myself because that is a ton of megapixels. But I'm not buying that camera because of the megapixels. That's actually the least positive thing about that camera for me. I'm getting it because the color depth is amazing with 16-bit. I couldn't care whether or not the megapixels were high. And actually, that camera is going to replace. So I guess I haven't really addressed it. For me, it's going to replace my Leica M8, which seems kind of weird, but because it's they're two sides of the world. But basically, they both had 16-bit color, and they both are going to be really beautiful skin tones. So they're really good for me for portraiture. They're what I'm going to want to use for that. So I love the X1D for that, and it's not about the megapixels. If they decide to come out with which they have for the H6, like a 100 megapixel version, I would still get the 50 for me because 50 is more than enough. So retouching is one reason why you want megapixels. The other reason why you want a lot of megapixels is if you need to shoot things in a way that needs to be cropped. So let me explain that. Number one, you may want to crop an image if you're shooting a project where you just can't get as close as you need to get even with your longest lens. You just might be in a situation where, hey, you know what? I know I'm going to be super far away from this, so I'm going to have to have more megapixels so that when I shoot it, I can crop in and it'll still be a sufficient number of megapixels. What's kind of cool is, I don't know if Canon can do it or not, but Nikons can go to APS-C mode, so it actually crops for you on the thing. It gives you less megapixels when I had the D5, and it would give you more of a punched in shot. So it was good for that. You didn't have to think about it. You could just do it in camera and not waste those pixels, on your cards. The other reason why I use it is, me personally, because I'm rarely in a situation where I can't get close enough to something, is for things like jewelry, and also for beauty on some level. When I want to get a really tight shot of something, and I also need it to be sharp. Because, as we know, hopefully, the closer you get to something, the more shallow the depth of field will be. This doesn't matter what camera system you're using, it doesn't matter anything. Like, the closer you are to something, the more shallow the depth of field. So, if I'm going to go really close on a ring, I might be shooting, f32, and like half the ring is still out of focus. So what I do is, I back the camera up, right? And I shoot it further away so the whole ring is in focus, and then I crop in. And typically I'm going to be, it's a client job, right? So I'm going to be tethered into Capture One or Focus or motorcycles, rocks, nights day, Capture One, Focus, those kind of things. And you can preset into your tethering software the exact crop you're going to be, so that way the client's not constantly looking at it going, why is it so far away? You literally just frame it up, shoot it so everything's in focus, and then you set the crop, and then every new image that pops up, they see it tight. And because you're looking at the pixel count, that it's plenty big enough for their final result, right? You're going to ask people, hopefully, before you shoot, what are you using this for? And use that as your baseline as to how many megapixels you think you need. So I guess that's the super long version of the answer to the question, which is, why don't I need a lot of megapixels? 90% of the time, I'm shooting stuff that's being delivered no bigger than like 8 to 10 megapixels. So if I'm shooting with 16 or 18, that still gives me a place to crop. And I think that I actually said it in the Nikon video that I'd look for the Z6 because it's 24 megapixels. That's plenty big enough for me, right? 24 megapixels maybe, I don't know. Anyways, the 48 megapixels for a small camera to me is just not needed. For me, because I don't do that, right? If I was a macro photographer, or if I was a heavy beauty photographer that did tons and tons of retouching, if that's what I did every day, not a couple times a year, commercially, then I would buy the camera, right? It's like I can rent a 100 megapixel Hasselblad, and one of the advantages of renting the 100 megapixel camera only the 10 days a year that you need it is that every single time you rent it, you get the newest camera, because rental houses are always buying the latest cameras. If I invest in a 100 megapixel camera now, and it costs me, whatever, $20,000, when I would buy into the lenses and everything else, next thing you know, they come out with another one 2 years from now, I'm still halfway into paying for that thing, so I tend to rent stuff I don't use a lot, and I buy stuff that I use every day. So for me, 90% of the time, I don't need a lot of megapixels. One of the reasons why I decided to do this video now, actually, as I mentioned when I opened it, is that I'm actually retouching something right now, and I shot a singer, I think I mentioned in one of the other videos a couple weeks ago, maybe it was last week, and by the way, this should be a whole other video, but they wanted a wind machine, which I hate. And of course, in the end, the picture they picked was the one where the wind was blowing, and the hair is all over her face in a way that they don't like. So now I'm retouching it out. And I shot it with the Canon, because normally the stuff's being delivered really small. I don't need to do tons of retouching. I don't typically do a lot of retouching on those kind of images. So now I'm like punched in at 100%, and I'm like trying to like retouch out hairs, which is a pain in the ass. I mean, if I had shot it with the Hasselblad, it would have been so much easier to retouch it. So, if I do a lot of that work, which I don't, this is like a couple times, maybe once a year I run into this problem where like, oh my God, I have to retouch something that I didn't think I was going to have to do a lot of retouch on. Then I guess shooting big all the time is good. But the problem with that is it takes up more space. The files are bigger to move. There's more hard drives to deal with, better computers to operate. I'm already, when I deliver, I'm already reducing the stuff to file size so people can deal with it, because they can't open those files. I send somebody a 48 megapixel file. Most people don't have, if you're not, you're watching this, so you're probably into photography, so you probably have a decent computer that's good for photography. Your average person doesn't have that. They got a regular computer that they surf the web with, and they do their, word processing. They don't, they don't have the whatever processors, blah blah, that they put in the, I don't really know. I go to my Apple guy, John, thanks, and he tells me the computer to buy. I have the computer that's good for what I do. I mean, I can, edit 4K video, blah blah. So when I'm opening these files, it's nothing. But for them, they can't handle it. So I'm always reducing the size of things. And I got a comment about delivery via Dropbox, so I'm going to do a video about that as well, so I'm not going to get into that right now. I think that probably is enough for this. So yeah, guys, if you have any other questions, I'm going to try to do more and more of these, at least until it gets cold. Yeah, I'll try to answer basic questions like this, as I think it's a pretty decent format. People have been liking it. If there's anything you want to see or don't want to see, then let me know in the comments, and I will do or not do it, depending on what I feel like. Thanks, guys.